A good Erev Shabbos, characteristically precise and picturesque as only a Yiddish proverb can be, they say, or they used to say, a make af jenem's arim is nit schwer zu tragen. A boil on somebody else's arm doesn't hurt too much. In other words, it's easy to diagnose other people's problems, to see clearly what other people are doing wrong and what they should be doing right, where they're missing the mark and have their priorities out of order. When it comes to looking at ourselves, it's much harder to be objective. First of all, I'm doing pretty good, thank you very much. Second of all, Adam karev etzel atzmai, says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, a person is considered like a close relative. So we are not allowed to testify in court about ourselves, neither for nor against. Let's face it, we're not objective about ourselves. And yet, we are spending time each week with a different section of the Torah in order to learn something useful and practical, not just some nice Jewish history, not just some familiar Bible stories, hopefully much more than that, news we can use. So let's take all the contradictions and problems and challenges, and this week's portion throws at us, and see what we can make of them. We're in Parshas Toldos now, the portion of generations. Chaye Sarah last week was the life of Sarah in which she died, but we speak about how she lived rather than how she died. And immediately following last week's Parsha, bridging into this week's, we have the idea of generations, Toldot. What happens to the progeny, the children, the grandchildren? Rivka gives birth to twins, Esau and Jacob, Yaakov and Esav. They're completely different by temperament. One is a hunter, an outdoorsman, a servant of his passions. He lives for the moment. His younger twin brother, by contrast, presents as quiet, unassuming, bit of a stay-at-home, maybe even a bit of a bookish sort, if we translate Yoshev Ohalim, a dweller in tents, as a scholar, like Rashi does. Details emerge as there's more to each character. Yaakov is rather clever. For example, when Esav comes back famished from a day in the field and demands the mess of pottage, the bowl of lentil stew that his brother has bubbling on the stove, he's ready to give up anything. Yaakov convinces him to sell his birthright as firstborn. Esav says, well, I'm going to die of hunger, so who needs a birthright? And the deal is done. The scene then shifts to Yitzchak, their father, in Gerar, in Philistia, the land of the Philistines. Apparently, Avraham had been there before and had dug wells in an earlier generation, and the Philistines filled those wells in. Now, doesn't everybody need water? Yes, but the Philistines would rather go without, or rather dig their own wells, rather than use the wells that Avraham dug. Can you imagine it? What people would act against its own self-interest to deprive its own people of water just to prove a point? Silly Philistines. Anyway, Yitzchak sets about redigging the wells that his father dug, and the locals start up with him. They argue over each well. Each well gets a name based on the circumstances. Esek, because they started up with him. His asku imo. Lo ravu aleha. This one in particular, they didn't quarrel over, so they called it Rehobot. Eventually, the people come to terms. Avimelech, the general Fichol, and Yitzchak sign a peace treaty, and all is well. There is hope. Later, the same Yitzchak feels that his time is drawing to a close in this life, and he wants to bless his sons. He summons the older one, Esav, and asks for some fresh game meat to be brought and prepared, and once that's done, he'll give his blessing. But a plot twist of high drama ensues. With the help of his mother, Yaakov dons the clothes of Esav, takes food his mother has prepared, and sneaks in to get the blessing of the firstborn, while his older brother is out hunting for lunch. Yaakov receives the blessing that was intended for his older twin, and he almost gets away with it. At that very moment, Esav, the actual firstborn, walks in and is stunned to find that his younger brother has received the blessing that came with Esav's birthright, apparently forgetting that he had sold the birthright to the younger brother for a pot of lentils some time before. Tearfully, Esav asks for a blessing anyway from their father, which he receives. Blessing in hand, he's still nonetheless outraged, and their mother counsels Yaakov to flee, which he does pronto. So the lessons are easily figured out and widely accepted. Don't take advantage of someone when they're hungry to overcharge them. It's frustrating to dig wells and then find that people have undone your hard work, but you may have to dig a second time. And don't deceive, not in business, not in blessings. Better to be honest. Be careful whom you're speaking to, and do not interfere in sibling rivalry. But if we take a cue from the early going in the Parsha, what may be clear on the face of it is much more complicated. We're not talking about what other people are doing wrong or should do better. Perhaps we're speaking about ourselves. When Rivka finds out she's pregnant, there's a great deal of hullabaloo happening in her insides. The travail causes her to ask what is happening, and the answer she gets is Shnei goyim bevitnech. There are two nations inside of you. Now, for those of us who never carried a baby inside of us, it's hard to imagine what that would be like, what one would be like, let alone two. At the same time, we can all relate to the feeling at some level of having two conflicting emotions or drives, or two conflicting feelings within us. Rashi gives a picturesque description of what was going on. When the expectant mother would pass by a yeshiva, the embryonic Yaakov would struggle to get out as he was drawn in that direction. When she passed by institutions of lesser status, the embryonic Esav would struggle to get out because that was his inclination. There are commentaries that give Esav the benefit of the doubt, not that he wanted to involve himself in unsavory pursuits, but rather his way was the sor meira, the turn away from evil worldview, and he was drawn to places of idolatry in order to destroy them and nullify their hold on people's imaginations. Be that as it may, we have two inclinations within us. It's an oversimplification to call them a good inclination and an evil inclination. That makes it too black and white. Let's call them instead a drive towards transcendence and a drive toward baser satisfactions. A drive toward transcendence draws our attention upward to loftier, holier pursuits. We have an inclination somewhere within us to daven, to give tzedakah, to come to shul, to learn, express acts of kindness toward one another. These originate in the divine part of us, the loftier elements of our soul. And a counterbalance to this is the more mundane drive. It's simply easier and it demands less of us to stay in bed a little longer rather than schlep to the minyan early in the morning when it's still dark out. It's simply easier to watch another video that someone sent us rather than read something online that has insight and worthwhile content, like an article or even a speech by a Torah teacher. It takes less time not to make a bracha when we eat our meal than it does to make the bracha. It's certainly easier to get up from the table and go about our day when we're done, rather than take 2 minutes and say the Birkat Hamazon, thanking God and acknowledging God as the source of all sustenance. This inclination is not bad per se, it just seeks to take the easy road. Of course, habituating ourselves, acclimatizing ourselves to a careless attitude to life brings in its wake a decreased sensitivity, less of a concern for holiness. So the mundane starts to feel like normal, and doing holy things starts to feel like a stretch, the opposite of how it should be. It takes attention and focus to be the best version of ourselves. So the two drives that Rivka Imenu was carrying, we're also carrying. We have a drive to be Yoshev Ohalim, like Yaakov, to dwell in the tents of learning and intellect and spirituality and holiness. And we also have a drive, like Esav, to be people of the field, to go out and hunt for a living. Are either of these bad? Of course not. It's a question of which one serves the other. If we say that when I'm done in the field, I'll spend the day hunting and trapping and whatever it is I do for a living, and then I'll have a nice pot of hot lentil soup, and then, if I'm not too tired, and if there's nothing else to do, if there's nothing good on Netflix, then maybe I'll learn a little something about the weekly Parsha. That's the drive to holiness, the godly soul being forced to serve the drive to the mundane, the animal soul. If, on the other hand, I make an effort, wake up a little early, maybe learn a little something before davening, and then focus on my morning prayers with a whole heart and an attentive mind, trying to gain a little mastery over myself before I go out and try to conquer the world. That's a different statement of what I hold to be important. And my intention while I'm out there working in the field is really to have the money and desire to give tzedakah generously to my synagogue, for example. Take part in learning experiences with groups and pairs, even on my own when I have a spare moment. And to think the whole week, soon it'll be Shabbos and I'll have a taste of the world to come. That's a different perspective entirely. That's the lower drive being put to use to support and further the aims of the divine soul. And it'll happen that I will work and I will dig wells to bring water, sustenance up to the surface, and others of mean spirits will plug them up. Maybe not even others, maybe through my own neglect, through my own carelessness, through the little Philistine that lives in my head, things will go awry. When that happens, I realize I just may have to redig those wells. And the most well-known and the high emotional point of the Parsha, where Yaakov dresses up as his brother Esav with goat fur on his neck and his arm, so that when his father tries to identify him by touch, he'll fool Yitzchak into thinking that he's the ruddier, outdoorsier brother. Although Yitzchak is advanced in years and his eyesight is failing, he's not fooled. Or we observers to the scene are not sure if he's really fooled, because the younger son's voice gives him away. And his father says, the voice is the voice of Yaakov, but the hands are the hands of Esav. This is also a guidepost for the Jewish people. In our Rav Kook class earlier this week, we focused on the perspective that in order to survive, never mind succeed, in a rough and tumble world where strength is often a key to survival, we as a people and as individuals may from time to time have to don the clothing of Esav, the outdoorsman, the hunter in the fields, in order to wrest our sustenance and even our very survival from a sometimes cruel world. However, that should only be a surface tactic. Our voice, our inner call, should remain the voice of Jacob, the voice of Yaakov, the Kol Yaakov, which will become Yisrael in Parshas to come, the one who grapples with challenges and prevails, whether it's fighting for physical survival or donning the garments of Esav to earn a living, provide for ourselves, our families, our communities. That engagement with the beasts of the field should never become the top priority or the ultimate focus. It should remain what it is, the means to an end, to allow the voice of Jacob to be heard, speaking to and speaking about God, and acknowledging the true source of our strength and abilities. In short, Parshas Toldos is about generations, and we are the continuation of the generations. Ramban on Parshas Lech Lecha a few weeks ago gave us the insight of Maaseh Ha'avos Siman Labanim, that the actions of the ancestors are a precursor for the lives of the children and their descendants. Even as the world changes and develops, hopefully evolves forward, although it doesn't always feel that way, we're confronted with new challenges that echo or resonate with what we've been through in the past. The corollary and the comfort is that we can draw wisdom, insight, and strength from our people's experiences in the past and be that much wiser, more well-informed, and ready to meet the challenges of the present. This Shabbos is a very special Shabbos in that we bless the new month of Kislev, which begins Saturday night, so Rosh Chodesh is Sunday and Monday. Kislev is, of course, the month with the shortest days and therefore the most darkness, and it is specifically in that month that we begin kindling the lights of the Hanukkah menorah, demonstrating and living by the saying of our sages that a little light dispels much darkness. May it be a month of light for us, Israel, and the world, and may the light of peace shine everywhere. The reappearance of the moon in Jerusalem, the eternal and undivided capital of Israel, will take place Sunday morning at 4:49 and 15 parts. Der Moiled wird sein Sonntag in der Früh, 49 Minuten nach 4 Säger mit 15 Chalokim. Rosh Chodesh wird sein Sonntag und Montag. Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos, a guten Chodesh.